ID. Now. And keep those hands where I can see them, sweetheart.
Good evening, officer. This is my home.
Her home! You hear that? Maid's got herself a master key.
That's her. That's the one I called about. She's been lurking on that porch all evening.
I closed on this house 3 weeks ago. I am watering my ferns.
And I'm the King of England. Where'd we get these, Off somebody's cleaning cart?
Officer, those are my house keys.
Evidence. Fancy paper. You steal mail too?
You are welcome to run the address. I am the owner of record.
It talks like a lawyer show! Woo! Look at all that. Boys downtown are gonna want pictures of what you've been shopping for.
You do not have a warrant. You do not have my consent. Step out of my doorway.
Here's the whole menu, sweetheart. You show me ID, or you wear bracelets on your own porch while the whole street films it. Somebody like you does not get a third option in Belhaven.
Sit. Right there. Like a good girl.
Are you getting all of this?
Who in the hell is she talking to?
Have you ever seen a man bully his way through the one door in America he should never have touched the woman on those steps, runs every federal prosecution in this state? That little camera works for her. And the giant in her doorway has about 9 hours left of the life he knows. Comment where you are watching from. Drop a like. And let us rewind. Ava Watson had put more crooked men in federal prison than any prosecutor in Georgia. And she had done it without ever once raising her voice. The title on her office door ran 3 lines deep. United States Attorney. Northern District of Georgia. Nominated by the White House. Confirmed by the United States Senate. In charge of every federal prosecution in the top half of the state. Belhaven included. Corrupt sheriffs, bribed inspectors, a judge who sold sentences like used cars. Her office had taken them all apart, quietly, on paper, one signature at a time. Her first year in the chair alone, she indicted a police captain running an overtime racket, a councilman selling zoning approvals like raffle tickets, and a state senator who resigned the morning her office called his lawyer. None of them saw her coming. Because nobody ever did. That was the entire method. Around the federal courthouse, they passed a saying from clerk to clerk like a fire drill. The quieter Watson gets, the worse your week is about to be. She had built all of it from a kitchen table in Macon. Her mother, Miss Mattie, ran a school lunchroom for 30 years. Double shifts. Feet swollen by Friday. And raised her daughter on 2 instructions. Stand up straight. Read everything twice. When Ava was 11, she watched a landlord's lawyer talk circles around her mother at that table, until the woman who never bowed to anything signed a paper she could not afford. Ava decided that night that nobody would ever out-talk her family again. Scholarship. Law Review. 14 years as a federal prosecutor before the nomination. She never lost the Macon in her voice. She just learned how to make it quiet. 3 weeks ago, at 43, she had closed on the first house she had ever owned. A brick craftsman on Camellia Court in Belhaven, 20 minutes north of the city. She had looked at the porch and seen her mother's porch with better bones. And that was the whole inspection. Boxes still stood stacked in the hallway. The ferns on the rail were cuttings from Miss Mattie's porch. Because you do not buy ferns, baby. You inherit them. On Saturday evening, she was watering them. Barefoot. Phone inside on the charger. when Belhaven decided to introduce itself. 3 doors down. Glenda Platt had been watching the new neighbor since the moving truck arrived. She had already filed one complaint about where that truck parked. On Saturday evening, she dialed the police line and gave her report in the voice of a citizen doing her civic duty. There is a woman lurking at the house on Camellia Court. She keeps circling the porch. She does not look like she belongs here. Is she doing anything illegal? Ma'am, she is watering things. The dispatcher, to her credit, paused. The call went out anyway. Coded as a suspicious person, check. And it was scooped up in under a minute by the one officer who collected calls like that on purpose. Officer Hoyt Prewitt had 12 years on the Belhaven force. 6 complaints in his file. And 0 consequences to show for them. 2 for force. 2 for language. Faux. Notably, for what the reports called unauthorized residence checks. Both at black households. Both dismissed after what the file described as coaching. Twice, the county had quietly paid to settle what his residence checks started. The checks continued, because in Belhaven, paperwork was cheaper than confrontation. He was 6'5", 280 pounds of weight room and grievance. And he kept a mental map of which streets certain faces belonged on. Camellia Court was not one of them. He liked to check whether certain people could prove they belonged where he found them. Beside him rode Deputy Shane Farrell, 7 months out of the academy. A kid who had joined to matter, laughed when Hoyt laughed, and had not yet asked himself why. The cruiser turned onto Camellia Court as the new homeowner lifted her watering can over the last fern, and the evening light caught a face that was, by any measure, the street had. Breathtaking. Dispatch said she's just watering plants. Hoyt, Shane offered, reading the screen. Hoyt slowed the cruiser to a crawl. The toothpick tilted up like a gun sight. In 4 seconds. The dashcam microphone he had forgotten about recorded the sentence that would follow him into a federal courtroom. Watch me water her down to the curb. Somebody's got to teach these people. This neighborhood has rules. He parked across her walk, blocking it. The way you park when you have already decided how the story ends. He hitched his belt, rolled his neck, and started up the path with Shane trailing. Phone already out. The doorbell saw them coming before she did. It began exactly the way the doorbell recorded it. And the doorbell does not editorialize. Boots on brick. A shadow crossing the ferns. Id. Now. And keep those hands where I can see them. Sweetheart? She told him it was her home. He turned that into a comedy routine for his deputy. The neighbor testified from the hedge like a woman collecting a bounty. He took her keys out of her living hand and buttoned them into his own pocket. And he read her mail out loud. And he put his palm on her front door and pushed it open without a warrant, without consent, without a heartbeat of hesitation. What the wide shot missed. The little brass lens caught in perfect focus. She never stepped back. She never raised her hands. She stood in the doorway of the first house she had ever owned and recited the law like a woman reading a recipe she wrote herself. Officer, Georgia has no law that requires me to carry identification on my own porch. I am not driving. I am not suspected of any crime you have named. I decline to produce ID. And I do not consent to your entry. I am asking you, on the record, to step back. On the record. Hoyt looked around the porch theatrically, hands cupped to his eyes like binoculars. What record? You see a record anywhere? Farrell Shane laughed 1 beat late and held his phone a little higher. Run the address, then, she said, still level. The county will tell you who owns this house. He did, mostly for the audience of it. Leaning on his shoulder mic, with his eyes locked on hers. Smiling like a man who had already won. Dispatch came back in 40 seconds. Flat and clear. Loud enough for the doorbell to file it away. Owner of record. A. Watson. Closed 3 weeks ago. No alerts. No lien. No warrants. Paper, says Watson. Hoyt let the word sit, then leaned in so close she could smell the spearmint and the sweat. Paper doesn't say her, does it? He straightened up and began to circle her. Slow, the way big men circle when the audience is warm. Ticking professions off on his fingers for the hedge to enjoy. Housekeeper, nanny, you do hair. Somebody's cousin watching the place, a finger gun at her. Help me out. Whose house are you sitting? For real. I've got all evening, and you've got exactly none of it. You have my name from your own dispatcher. Officer, I've got a name. He smiled with every tooth he owned. You people always come with a name. Comes with a story, too. Usually. Long one. Sad one. He glanced at Shane. They practice them. And here is the detail the whole country would come to know. He was standing on the answer. Under his size, 14 boot, woven into the bristles of a brand new doormat. 6 block letters spelled out, the only identification the law actually required. Watson, bought the same week as the house. Centered under the knocker by a woman who had waited 43 years to own a door worth knocking on, he would stand on that name for 11 more minutes, shifting his weight on it, grinding it a little with each turn. He never once looked down. The show got worse the way these shows do. One prop at a time. He hooked one finger under her watering can where it sat on the rail and tipped it. Slow, watching her face while the water darkened the boards and ran between her bare feet. Oops, he said, to laughter from the hedge, where Glenda Platt had come down her own walk carrying. In the fullness of her civic pride, a sweating glass of sweet tea, not for the woman on the steps, for the officers. You boys are doing the Lord's work, she said, and Shane got that on camera too. Because a 7-month deputy does not yet know the difference between a trophy and a confession. Last chance. Sweetheart. Hoyt's voice dropped into the gravel register he saved for the moments he liked best. ID. Or bracelets. Right here on this pretty porch. In front of all your fans. I am going to reach for nothing, she said. I am going to stand still. And you are going to make a decision you cannot take back. Her phone was inside, on the charger. She moved her hand only to steady the rail. And that was enough. Hands, he bellowed, loud enough to lift birds off the power line. And his fist closed around her wrist in midair. A wrist he could have circled twice. And he announced to the street that she was reaching. And Shane's camera swung to catch it and caught. Instead, a barefoot woman being spun like a coat and pressed chest first against her own front door. The cuffs went on under the porch light she had paid the deposit to turn on. Cranked one notch past necessary. Her reading glasses slipped out of her curls and landed on the boards. And Deputy Shane Farrell, on reflex, bent and picked them up, and then stood there holding a stranger's glasses with no idea what a man is supposed to do with them, and set them gently on the rail next to the tipped can. It was the only gentle thing that happened on that porch. And his own phone filmed him doing it. Hoyt recited her rights through a grin. Obstruction. Criminal trespass. Resisting. Trespass. She repeated, cheek against her own door. Voice so calm, it sounded like the only sane thing on the street. On my own deed. Write that down. Officer. Spell it exactly like that. He marched her down her own front walk barefoot, one giant hand around her arm, past her tipped watering can, past the ferns her mother rooted, past Glenda Platt, filming vertical with her tea raised in a toast. Porch lights were coming on up and down Camellia Court. Phones glowed in doorways. In a driveway across the street, a teenager home from college held his phone very still and zoomed in tight on the doormat, because he had noticed what the officer had not. And some instinct told him the close-up would matter. Most of the street watched the way people watch weather. But directly across the road, an old man in a cardigan, a veteran who had lived on that corner 40 years, took off his cap and held it against his chest, the way you do for a funeral or a flag, and did not look away once. At the cruiser, Hoyt palmed the top of her head and folded her into the back seat with more force than any door frame requires. She settled onto the plastic, straightened her spine, and looked at the deputy holding the phone. Deputy Farrell. Not unkind. Precise. Note the time. 16 minutes past 7. Shane's grin flickered for the first time, because there is something in the voice of a person stating the time for a record that makes a certain kind of man suddenly need to know what the record is for. And then, with the woman cuffed and the street still watching, Officer Hoyt Prewitt walked back up her path, stepped over her doormat, and went inside her house. Protective sweep. He would write later. The interior cameras. One on the bookshelf. One over the kitchen doorway. Recorded a different genre entirely. A man strolling another citizen's hallway like a buyer at an estate sale, nudging a moving box with his boot, pausing at a framed law degree leaning against the wall in bubble wrap, tilting his head at the Latin, and moving on. Because reading, his file would later suggest, was never the man's sport. In the kitchen, he opened her refrigerator, lifted out a bottle of sparkling water, cracked it one-handed, and toasted the empty house of the woman locked in his car. He drank it leaning on her counter, unhurried, boots wide, king of somebody else's castle. And when he set the bottle down, he set it on the flat frame lying face up on a moving box beside him. A document with a gold seal and a presidential signature. And the condensation drew a neat, wet ring across the middle of it while he checked his phone. He used her commission as a coaster. His deputy waited on the porch the whole time, toes exactly at the threshold, and would not cross the line of the door. 11 minutes later, he came out. Locked nothing. Left her front door standing open to the evening, and drove the United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia to be booked under a charge sheet he was already composing out loud. To laughter, with her house keys riding in his breast pocket. Behind them, on the dark porch, the little red light blinked. Uploading. The Bellhaven booking room smelled like toner and cold coffee, and it processed her the way small machines process big things, without looking. Name, Ava Watson. Date of birth, address, the one on Camellia Court, which drew a snort from the big man leaning in the doorway. Occupation, attorney. She said. The room enjoyed that. Everybody's a lawyer till the bail hearing. Sweetheart. The desk sergeant typed it in without a flicker. Because machines only answer the questions they are asked. And nobody in that building thought to ask the second question. They photographed her barefoot, in linen, chin level, eyes calm. And the booking photo would later run on every network in America, looking less like a mugshot than a portrait of patience. They gave her a cell with a steel bench and took everything else. She sat, crossed her ankles, and did what she had done for 20 years of hostile courtrooms. She counted. Unlawful entry. Warrantless seizure of her keys. Fabricated probable cause. Excessive force on a compliant subject. False arrest. False charging. A protective sweep that was neither. Personal use of seized property, which is a gentle way to describe a man drinking a prisoner's sparkling water on her own countertop. She cataloged violations the way other people count sheep. And somewhere around 11, she decided that was a good number to sleep on. But first, the phone call they are required to give you. 400 miles of careers have ended on the assumption that a quiet woman has nobody to call. The duty phone rang once. Pitts. Nolan. It's me. A pause. You could park a truck in. Nolan Pitts. First Assistant United States Attorney. 26 years of federal trials. A courtly drawl and a spine of rebar. Said only, ma'am. 3 things. In order. 1. Call the duty officer at the Civil Rights Division in Washington. Not our office. As of this sentence, we are recused. And I want that in writing tonight. 2. My home system backs up to the cloud. Both cameras. Porch and interior. Preserve everything. Chain of custody from the first frame. 3. She looked at the wall, where somebody had scratched a calendar into the paint. Nobody wakes the Attorney General before 6. Let the county finish its paperwork first. Understood. Ma'am. A breath. Consider it done. She hung up and went back to her bench. And if any camera had been pointed at her then, it would have recorded a woman closing her eyes like a passenger on a train that has finally, after many delays, left the station. Upstairs, Officer Hoyt Prewitt typed his report with 2 proud fingers, tongue between his teeth, narrating the good parts to the night shift. The doorbell got the biggest laugh. Talking to a doorbell. Note. Boys. Asked it a question. Whole street heard her. He did the voice. He did it twice. A records clerk laughed along politely, and then, at her desk, quietly searched the name Watson plus attorney on her phone. Read the first result. Read it again. And closed the browser like a woman closing a door on a fire. Subject refused lawful identification. Subject made furtive movements toward the residence. Subject attempted to reach for an unknown object. Subject became combative and was restrained with minimum necessary force. Protective sweep of the residence conducted for officer safety. No property was seized. 5 lies and 1 theft. Filed at 10 past 11. With her house keys sitting in his locker, 11 feet from the printer. His sergeant initialed it without reading past the second line. Another suspicious person. Handled. Belhaven slept well. The internet did not. Glenda Platt, flush with victory, had posted her vertical video before the cruiser cleared the corner. Captioned in the confident font of the never once embarrassed. Neighborhood watch works. Ladies, stay vigilant. Her own footage showed a handcuffed homeowner, a tipped watering can, and a uniformed giant walking into the house of the woman he was arresting. She had, in her civic pride, published the evidence. Bit 10. The clip had jumped the neighborhood group and gone feral. By midnight, it had stitched itself to a second angle. Some teenagers zoom from a driveway across the street. And strangers 3 time zones away were slowing it down frame by frame. Look at the doormat. Look at the doormat. The name is Under His Boot. At 1 in the morning, in the comment pile under Glenda's post, a court reporter from Atlanta typed 11 words and then sat staring at her own screen. Wait. I know her. That is the U.S. attorney. At 20 to 2, A duty officer at the Civil Rights Division in Washington answered a call from a Georgia number and heard a courtly drawl deliver. Without decoration. The strangest sentence of his career. This is the first assistant. Northern District of Georgia. I am reporting the unlawful arrest and detention of a sitting United States attorney by municipal officers at her own home. The line went quiet. Say that twice, the duty officer said. Nolan Pitts said it twice. Slower, and Washington came awake, one desk lamp at a time. By 2, the clip had a new caption, Nobody in Belhaven wrote, and it was traveling faster than sunrise. Federal. At 6 in the morning, exactly, because she had said not before 6. The Attorney General of the United States was briefed by phone about a booking photo. By 6:20, a Civil Rights Division team had wheels up out of Washington. By 7, the FBI's Atlanta Civil Rights Squad had opened a file with a case number that would outlive everyone in it. Belhaven's morning shift arrived to donuts and glory. Hoyt Prewitt held the vending machines like a stage, retelling the doorbell part with full choreography. Asked the doorbell a question. Boys. Real Pollitt. 2. He did the voice again. The laughter came back thinner this time, because half the room was scrolling phones under the table, and the clip now had a one-word caption and 9 million views. And the comments were a wall of the same sentence in different fonts. Do you know who that is? Shane Farrell sat at the edge of the room, not laughing, holding his coffee like a man holding a rail. At 8:50, 3 sedans with federal plates parked across the mouth of the lot. Nose out. The way you park, when you do not intend for anyone to leave quietly. Out of the first came a silver-haired man in seersucker with a bow tie and a litigation bag. Out of the second came a very quiet man from the FBI whose card read Civil Rights Squad and whose face read nothing at all. Chief Dugan. Called in off his Sunday lake. Met them at the counter, still smelling of sunscreen. The man in seersucker introduced himself in a courtly drawl that made courtesy sound like a countdown. Nolan Pitts, First Assistant United States Attorney. Northern District of Georgia. Conference room. Please. Everyone whose name appears on last night's arrest. They assembled. Dugan at the head. Sweating through his collar, the sergeant who had initialed the report, arms crossed, Shane against the wall, trying to become drywall, and Hoyt, spread wide in his chair, insolent, right leg bouncing out a rhythm. His face refused to admit. Pitts set a leather folder in the center of the table, opened it, and turned it to face them. An official photograph, charcoal suit, quiet eyes. Beside it, a document with a gold seal. Ava Watson, United States Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia, nominated by the President, confirmed by the United States Senate, the chief federal law enforcement officer for the top half of this state, which includes, gentlemen, every square inch of Belhaven. He let the room take a breath it did not enjoy. Last night your department booked her barefoot, on her own porch, for watering ferns. Officer, he looked at Hoyt without hurry. You demanded identification from the one woman in Georgia whose signature decides which police officers stand in front of federal juries. Nobody's leg bounced now. Your report lists 5 events I have watched not happen, on 3 separate cameras. It also states that no property was seized. Pitts turned a page without looking at it. Officer, the keys. What are house keys? Breast pocket. Then your locker. The interior footage shows the pocket. The locker log shows the rest. Produce them, please. The walk to the locker room and back took 4 minutes and lasted, by every account, of the men in that room. Several years. Hoyt Prewitt set a small evidence envelope on the table, like a man setting down something hot. Pitts did not touch it. "Photograph that where it sits," he said to the quiet FBI man. And then, to the room, in the same unhurried drawl. "Here is where we stand. Every charge from last night was dismissed and expunged as of 7 this morning. Ms. Watson's office is fully recused. She insisted on that from a holding cell before she asked for her phone call, which tells you everything about her that you failed to ask. The matter now belongs to the Civil Rights Division and the Bureau. Every man in this room is entitled to counsel. A beat. I recommend the good kind." He gathered the folder, paused at the door, and looked back at Hoyt with something that was almost pity. If pity wore a bow tie. "Song. You stood on her name for 11 minutes, demanding to know it. It has been on your paperwork all night. It will be on yours forever now." Before the federal sedans had cleared the lot, Chief Dugan asked for badges and weapons. Pending review. Hoyt unpinned his star slowly, like it was being peeled off with skin, and dropped it on the table from an inch up. Shane Farrell laid his down flat and centered it with 2 fingers. Gently. "The way you return something you now understand was only borrowed." The sergeant who had initialed the report went to his office and closed the door. And through the glass they watched him read, for the first time, every word of what he had signed. 90 minutes later, the department's account posted its first and only statement of the affair, standing firmly behind the professionalism of its officers pending review. The replies arrived within the hour. Most of them a single image. A boot. A doormat. 6 letters. Communications professors would teach that post for years. Under the slide title, "Stop Typing." They processed her out at 9. The lobby had grown very quiet and very busy at the same time. Every deputy discovering urgent paperwork at distant desks. On the chief's direct order. Calculated for the cameras already massing outside. It was Officer Hoyt Prewitt who was made to bring the property envelope to the counter and return. Item by item. What he had taken. She stood in yesterday's linen. Barefoot, no longer. Someone having found her a pair of courthouse flats. And she held out one open palm and did not move it. The giant shook the keys out of the envelope. His hand, every camera at that counter would confirm, was the one trembling. The keys landed in her palm without their brass touching his skin, and her fingers closed over them, unhurried. "These stay with me this time," she said, to him. At a volume only, he and the counter microphone earned, and walked out through the doors into the flashbulbs without giving the press a syllable. Her statement, her office said, would come in the appropriate forum. Prosecutors mean courtrooms when they say that. She was home by 9:40. The front door had been shut and sealed by federal agents overnight. Her ferns were still breathing, and the watering can still lay on its side where a finger had tipped it. She stood it upright herself. Then she sat down on her own top step in the morning sun, laced her fingers, and closed her eyes for exactly 1 minute. Somewhere north, in an office with a view of nothing, a prosecutor she had never met was reading a file with her name spelled correctly all the way through. She went inside, made coffee, and let the machine run. Some machines you do not have to touch. The Civil Rights Division does not arrive in a town so much as settle over it. And by Tuesday, Belhaven had learned the difference. Federal evidence technicians moved through the little police department cloning drives and carrying out sealed boxes past deputies who suddenly held their coffee with both hands. The city attorney canceled a vacation. The mayor's office issued a statement containing the word regrettable 4 times and the word unlawful 0 times. And the internet counted. The case assembled itself with an ease that made veteran agents superstitious. Because the evidence was not scattered. It was stacked. Exhibit 1. The porch camera. 4 minutes of ultra-high definition, with audio so clean you could hear the toothpick. Exhibit 2. The interior cameras. A man drinking seized sparkling water on a prisoner's counter. Then, setting the wet bottle down on a framed presidential commission and drawing a ring of condensation across the seal of the United States. Exhibit 3. Deputy Farrell's own phone. Voluntarily surrendered, which had recorded the mockery. The takedown. And one unbearably human moment of a rookie setting a stranger's reading glasses gently on a rail in the middle of it. Exhibit 4. Glenda Platt's proud upload. Preserved by subpoena before her frantic deletion. Time-stamped. Captioned. Self-authenticating. Exhibit 5. A college kid's steady zoom on a doormat. And Exhibit 6. The one the country could not stop watching. From the camera, nobody remembered. Officer Hoyt Prewitt's own body camera had functioned perfectly all evening. He had performed for every lens on that street except the one pinned to his own chest. It caught the male reading at 8 inches. It caught the menu speech. You show me ID, or you wear bracelets. In first person. Like a confession filmed by the confessor. The most damning camera on Camellia Court had been his the entire time. Arrogance. One agent wrote in the margin of the intake memo, is a chain of custody. Then came the doormat photograph. Blown up poster size for the grand jury. A size 14 boot planted across 6 woven letters. The caption the internet had already written became the case's shorthand. Printed in Courier on the exhibit tag. The identification was under his boot. By then, the country had assigned the affair its permanent name. The doormat video. And it had escaped the news cycle into the culture. Law professors ran the porch footage in first-year criminal procedure and stopped it on her sentence. I decline to produce ID, and I do not consent to your entry. And told their students. That is, the whole semester, in 19 words. Her question to the camera crossed over entirely. Are you getting all of this? Went onto church signs? Onto protest posters. Onto a hand-leaded banner at a high school graduation in Macon. A reporter caught Nolan Pitts on the courthouse steps and asked when Ms. Watson would finally speak publicly. The drawl never quickened. Ms. Watson has made one public statement this year. She made it to a doorbell. A beat. It held up. The pattern unit went back 6 years and found what pattern units find. 22 suspicious person and residence checks initiated by Officer Prewitt. 19 involved black residents. 0 produced a sustained charge. A pediatrician made to prove he lived where his mailbox stood. In his own scrubs. A college student house sitting for his grandmother. Proned out on her lawn while her neighbors watched from windows. He had washed every summer since he was 10. Each incident had generated a complaint. Each complaint had been resolved with a memo that used the word coaching. Signed by the same sergeant who had initialed the arrest report without reading past the second line. The memos went into a folder that the prosecutors labeled without visible emotion. Notice. Notice. In a civil rights case. Is the word for the difference between a mistake and a policy. Belhaven had 6 years of it, in a single manila folder. The 19 came in when the Bureau called. Those still in the county, and willing, and the pattern grew faces. The pediatrician sat very straight in a gray suit and answered every question in complete sentences. I was collecting my mail in my scrubs. 11 steps from my own front door. He asked who I worked for. I said the Children's Hospital. He asked who I really worked for. A pause. I keep my hospital badge on the dashboard now. facing out. My father did the same thing with his veteran's card in Alabama. 50 years ago. I had allowed myself to believe we were done needing papers. I resent that I was corrected. The college student came with his grandmother, who held his hand under the table where she thought nobody could see. And the camera saw he made me lie face down on grass I used to mow. The young man said, "My grandmother watched from the window she used to pay me $1 to wash. You want to know what a residence check costs?" He looked up for the first time. It costs the way she looks at uniforms now. The witnesses from Camellia Court came in one by one after them, and Belhaven discovered what it was actually made of. The veteran from the corner arrived in a blazer with a folded cap in his hand and gave the deposition the evening news played in full. I have seen people marched off their own property before. Other countries. Other uniforms. I took my hat off because I know a wrong parade when I see one, and I wanted somebody on that street to be showing her some respect while it happened. He paused, jaw working. 40 years I have lived on that corner. She had the nicest ferns on the block and a wave for me every evening. Nobody ever made me prove I lived there. The college kid brought his phone and his mother. The records clerk described searching a name at midnight and closing the browser. And when the prosecutor asked why she had said nothing that night, she looked at her hands and said, "The same reason everybody says nothing. I needed the job more than I needed to be right." The room let that sit, because it was the truest sentence anyone had said in Belhaven in 6 years. Shane Farrell's interview lasted 4 hours, and for the first 40 minutes, loyalty fit him like a jacket, 2 sizes too big. Then the agents played the dash cam. Watch me water her down to the curb. Somebody's got to teach these people. This neighborhood has rules. They asked whose voice that was. Shane looked at the table, and his leg went still, and he chose his, and I laughed. He wiped his face with his palm. I filmed it because it felt like being inside something. You come out of the academy and you just want to be inside. I've watched my own video more times than I can say out loud. And every time, the only person on that porch acting like police is her. Stating the law. Staying calm. Making a record. He exhaled. She told me to note the time. 16 past 7. I wrote it on my hand that night because I couldn't say why. I know why now. She was the only one there who believed the truth would ever be asked for. He surrendered his phone, his notes, and his badge, in that order. Cooperating fully, before the grand jury convened, he hand-delivered a letter of apology to the United States Attorney's Office. 2 pages. Handwritten. She sent back 1 line on office letterhead, which he framed, which tells you what kind of letter it was. Testify truthfully. That is the whole apology. Chief Dugan lasted 2 hours across the table and spent the first one explaining that his department handled things in-house. The lead prosecutor let him finish the phrase for the 4th time, then slid the notice folder across the table and opened it to the 6th coaching memo. "You kept the house, Chief," she said. "You just stopped handling it." His lawyer asked for a break. The chief spent it in the hallway, looking at the framed photographs of his own academy class. And whatever he found in those young faces, he came back in and answered the rest like a witness instead of a landlord. The quiet man from the FBI filed his summary in language the Bureau teaches, which made 1 sentence of it land harder than any adjective could. The homeowner's conduct was professional throughout the encounter. The arresting officer's conduct is most accurately described by his own cameras. Glenda Platt was deposed for 90 minutes that aged her a decade. The transcript escaped. As transcripts do. She was lurking. On her own porch. "Ma'am?" She kept walking back and forth. Watering ferns. "Ma'am, back." And forth. It looked suspicious. What made it suspicious, she did not look like she belonged there. Her name was on the mailbox. The deed. And the doormat. Ma'am. Well, how was I supposed to know? She lived there. There was a moving truck 3 weeks prior. Ma'am, you filed a complaint about where it parked. The silence that followed lasted 9 full seconds on the recording. And her attorney requested a break. And the internet, which had already found her sweet tea toast frame by frame, held proceedings of its own. She was never charged, because charging a false report means proving she knew it was false. And the government had bigger game and better exhibits. Her HOA, in a twist nobody ordered, but everybody savored, sent her a formal letter about the reputational standards of the neighborhood. In Macon, the reporters found Miss Maddie on her porch in her church clothes, and she gave them 30 seconds that led every broadcast in the state. My baby sat on those steps like a lady, because I raised her to know which one of them was trespassing. She rocked once. I taught lunchroom for 30 years. I have seen big boys take little boys' things 1,000 times. It always ends the same way. A grown-up shows up. She rocked again. The grown-up showed up. That week, a package arrived at Camellia Court with no return address needed. Fern cuttings, rooted in wet cotton, and a note in a lunchroom manager's careful hand. Ferns hold on to things. Baby, so do we. Hold on to the house. Let go of the evening. Ava Watson gave her own testimony last, in a closed session. Flat and precise. A prosecutor building a record she would never personally use. I identified the legal standard allowed. I identified the owner of record through his own dispatcher. The only identification I declined to produce was the one the law does not require and the doormat already displayed. Pause. The kind she was famous for. My front door stood open for 4 hours. Nothing was taken from my home except my keys, my evening, and my expectation of the next knock. 2 of those have been returned. The grand jury needed less than a day. True bill. Every count. The indictment came down on a gray Thursday and read like the porch camera had learned to type. Deprivation of rights under color of law. With the aggravating features of unlawful entry into a home and unlawful arrest, falsification of federal records. 1 count per invented sentence. Theft of property under color of authority. A count the internet immediately renamed the keys. And obstruction. For the report that had tried to bury all of it before midnight. Hoyt Prewitt did not plead. Men built like Hoyt Prewitt rarely believe a room exists that they cannot fill. And his union bought him a trial to prove it. It took 4 days. The prosecution called almost nobody. It mostly pressed play. The porch camera. The body camera he forgot he was wearing. The dash cam sentence. Watch me water her down to the curb. Played twice at the defense's own unwise insistence that it was banter. The doormat photograph on an easel, facing the jury box. For the entire trial, the defense argued reasonable mistake. On cross, the prosecutor from Washington asked exactly one question that mattered. She asked the doorbell question. When the defendant announced his protective sweep, Officer Prewitt, the homeowner, had already asked her camera, "Are you getting all of this?" It was, "What is your answer?" The witness looked at his lawyer, and his lawyer looked at the table. And the courtroom got to watch a very large man understand, in real time, that some questions do not have a second option either. The jury needed 1 afternoon. Guilty. Every count. At sentencing, he stood in a civilian suit, cut generously and still too small. No toothpick. No audience. The judge, a small woman who did not look up from her notes until the end, read the paragraph, the papers printed whole. Mr. Prewitt, The Fourth Amendment was written by men who had watched soldiers walk through doors precisely the way you walked through hers. At an American's own threshold, the Constitution asks the questions, not the government. You demanded the one document the law never required, while standing on a mat that displayed it, in front of a camera that recorded it, wearing a second camera that convicted you of it. This court has heard the recording many times. The homeowner asked whether it was getting all of this. It was Mr. Prewitt. It got all of it. 41 months. Permanently barred from law enforcement in every jurisdiction of the United States. The machinery kept turning after him, the way it does once somebody finally feeds it. The sergeant, whose pen had blessed 6 years of coaching memos, pleaded to a federal misdemeanor, took probation and a permanent bar, and retired his signature. Chief Dugan announced his retirement the same afternoon the consent decree was announced, which fooled no one. The decree ran 5 years. Residence checks were abolished outright, replaced by a form requiring written, articulable cause before any officer knocks on any door. A form, the rank and file, without irony, and within a month, named the Watson form. Body camera review became random and mandatory, because the lesson of the case was that the cameras had never been the problem. The department's stop data went onto a public dashboard that any citizen could sort in 4 seconds. And in Belhaven's first published year, residence checks fell to 0 and stayed there. Shane Farrell testified truthfully, as instructed, resigned quietly, and was hired a year later by a county on the far side of the state, where his file now contains a letter of cooperation from the Department of Justice and where colleagues report. He is the deputy who recites the law on porches before anyone touches anyone. The civil case never reached a jury. Belhaven's insurers read the exhibit list and wrote a check for $2,600,000. And Ava Watson, who had never wanted a dime of it, signed it away within the month. A civil rights litigation clinic at a Georgia law school, funded for a decade. A statewide program that prints wallet cards teaching citizens what the law actually requires at their own front door, and a scholarship at a Macon high school. First-generation students headed to law school, named not for her, but for a lunchroom manager who taught her daughter to read everything twice. Glenda Platt sold her house in the spring. The family that bought it has a swing set up within a week and a wave for everybody. The street, neighbors say, is friendlier now. Nobody surveils anybody. The sweet tea stays on porches where it belongs. 1 year later, on a golden Saturday evening, the ferns on Camellia Court had doubled, because Miss Maddie's cuttings took the way her cuttings always do. The porch looks the way it was always supposed to look. A swing added in the fall. 2 rocking chairs. Because on Sundays, a retired lunchroom manager holds court in one of them with sweet tea of her own and opinions about everybody's hedges. The new family from 3 doors down drifts over some evenings, their little girl chalking suns on the front walk while the grown folks laugh low about nothing. The old veteran still raises his coffee from his corner every morning and gets a wave every time. And that arrangement suits them both completely. The doormat is new. The original lives in a federal evidence archive, bootprint and all. And she let it go without ceremony. The replacement says welcome in small letters. Because the name, it turned out, was never the visitor's business. The little brass camera still watches the door. It has not once been needed since. That is what winning quietly looks like. You paid for this porch twice. Baby. Miss Maddie says some Sundays. Rocking. Watching the street go gold. Worth both prices. Mama. Every spring, a card arrives from the law school clinic, her settlement built. Signed by students she will never meet. She keeps them in the hall drawer with the courthouse flats. Somebody found her that morning. Because certain objects are worth keeping exactly where you can explain them. Her office went back to work the way it always had. Without press conferences, that fall it indicted 2 more men who had treated a badge like a skeleton key. In a different county. For different doors. The quieter Watson gets. The courthouse still says. The saying required no update. Some evening, when the light goes gold, she waters the ferns barefoot and then sits on the top step on purpose, right where a giant once folded her down like patio furniture, and drinks her mother's sweet tea on her own brick. Unhurried, a Belhaven cruiser rolls past on its loop some nights, slows, and a young officer she has never met lifts 2 fingers off the wheel. Evening, counselor. She lifts the watering can an inch in return. That is the whole conversation. And it is exactly enough. So tell me something. Because I read every single comment. What is the one place on this earth where nobody should ever get to make you prove you belong? Tell me that story and where you are watching from. Share this with somebody who guards their own front door. And subscribe. Because stories where quiet power answers loud cruelty are exactly what I bring here every single week.
Real talk before you go. He demanded ID with his boot planted on the doormat, spelling her name, then used her presidential commission as a coaster. She asked her own doorbell one question, "Are you getting all of this?" And that little camera answered louder than she ever raised her voice. Keys pocketed, door shoved open, cuffs on her own porch, and by sunrise, Washington was reading his report back to him line by line, 41 months, and the keys went back into her open palm without touching his skin. Drop a like if that doorbell line gave you chills, and go stand in your own doorway like you own it, because you do.